Some room for Warner and bang down the ground. Look at the power he generates.
Hello and welcome to episode 52 of Radio Cricket. Yes, that is 52, the same number of tears that Ravi Shastri sheds every time he hears Ramiz Raja ask the crowd, "Are you ready?" I'm Nishant Joshi, and I'm joined as always by the man who makes Shikhar Dhawan's moustache look girly. It is the one, the only, James Marsh.
Oh, well, thank you, Nishant. Well, as Shikhar's been emasculating Merv Hughes for most of the day, that's a great compliment indeed. So, anyway, how are you? What's caught your eye in the Champions Trophy so far?
Yes, James, I've been doing very well. Just about recovering from my IPL withdrawal syndrome, and the thing that's caught my eye this week and been in the news a fair bit is that Danish Ramdin, the West Indies wicketkeeper, was charged with a level 2 offence of the ICC Code of Conduct this week for dropping the ball off a Misbah-ul-Haq edge in the West Indies game against Pakistan. And for those of you who don't know, a level 2 breach is somewhere between level 1, which is eating a cricket ball, and level 3, which is a commentator mentioning DRS live on air. So, for those of you who haven't seen Ramdin's drop, he initially took the ball cleanly off a Misbah-ul-Haq edge, then he clearly spilled the ball, and then he picked up the ball again with the naive glee that you'd expect from a Yorkshire Terrier, but with the malice of an IPL team owner. Ramdin then rolled the ball to the umpire as if he'd taken the catch cleanly, but replays then show that Misbah-ul-Haq in fact would be granted another life, which, frankly, at his age, I'm sure Misbah is more than grateful for. So, James, what do you make of the crime and the punishment?
Well, I thought the crime was fairly ludicrous, and the punishment, a 2-match ban and fined 100% of his match fee, was a little bit harsh. Because I think there's probably no greater punishment in life than looking guiltier than a man whose wife has just checked his browsing history. Obviously, it was done under the auspices of the spirit of cricket, which I think is possibly a fairly vacuous concept, and Michael Holding was getting very irritated with this on commentary this morning, and I think if Simon Taufel pulls out of giving this year's Spirit of Cricket lecture, Mikey would make a very good replacement, even though his attitude towards the concept suggests that his speech would just consist of him standing up saying, "This is bollocks," and sitting down again. I don't think it was comparable to a batsman not walking if he nicks it. There is more of a convention with that, whether or not you agree with this or not. But, you know, I still thought the punishment was harsh.
The curious thing was that Ramdin's punishment was actually announced by the ICC on the 1-year anniversary of his now infamous Yeviv Takna. I'm not sure if that's the proper Trinidadian way of pronunciation, but I gave it my best shot. And it does kind of beg the question, is this some sort of yearly lapse in Danish Ramdin's sort of character? Is it something that when he comes to English shores, he's just kind of compelled to do something which makes him look like a buffoon in front of millions and millions of people? Because that's what he's done, and he's done them exactly 365 days apart, just 200 miles away from each other.
But Nishan, perhaps sticking with people who've come to England and made slight fools of themselves, we should possibly talk about Pakistan. It's been a terribly disappointing couple of games for them. They've had consecutive losses to the West Indies and South Africa, consecutive collapses. So I must admit I had high hopes for Pakistan going into this tournament. So where on earth has it all gone wrong for Misbah's men?
Yes, James. Pakistan have been the first casualty of the Champions Trophy 2013. That is, of course, if we're excluding Imran Farhat's international career. And yeah, it's been kind of disappointing, but sort of unsurprising as well. We had high hopes for Pakistan. I suppose we had high hopes, but middling expectations with Pakistan. We always knew what they were capable of with their exceptional bowling attack with Wahab Riaz, Saeed Ajmal, Junaid Khan and Mohammad Irfan, and Mohammad Hafiz as well, who's been excellent in their 2 matches so far. But their batsmen just haven't performed at all. In their 2 matches to date, the Pakistani batsmen, if you exclude Nasir Jamshed and Misbah-ul-Haq, the Pakistan batsmen have scored an average of just 4.3 runs between them. So, James, where do you think the Pakistanis have gone all wrong?
Well, I don't know really, Nishan. I mean, the only good thing you can say about Pakistan's batting is that Michael Clark can take comfort that there is something else on Earth more brittle than his spine. But apart from that, it's very little to see what good can come of it. Of course, as you say, we went into this tournament with high hopes for them, very high hopes, I suppose, if we're talking about Mohamed Irfan. But particularly coming off the back of the 3-2 defeat in South Africa. It was a defeat, but they really did compete there. You also had a 3D realising that the notions of a bat and a ball weren't entirely irreconcilable, and it just seemed there was a bit of a buzz around them coming into this tournament. Of course, they obviously had Trent Woodhill, the Australian batting coach, brought in for 3 weeks, and there's been a lot of stick knocking about his performance, but I mean, to me, his job was very much like having to put a plaster on an aneurysm, so I really don't think you could have expected.
Nice medical reference, James.
Yeah, I thought you'd like that one. So anyway, I don't know, I was incredibly disappointed. I felt sorry for Misbah. He was desolate in his press conference. I know, admittedly, it's quite hard to tell when Misbah feels desolate or if he's feeling elated, but I did feel sorry for him. I spent 2 years bigging him up as the great administrator, the stabilisers on the sometimes kiddies bike that is Pakistan cricket, and yeah, it was just a shame to see it all collapsing around his ears once more.
Birmingham bust-up news now, and reports suggest that after Australia were defeated by England on Saturday in the Champions Trophy, Australian batsman David Warner punched England's most successful fielders, that is of course young Joe Root, with a glancing blow to the chin. The incident apparently took place at a walkabout in Birmingham on Saturday night. Now, I know we have an international audience, so for those of you who don't know, Walkabout is a chain of pubs in England, ostensibly designed to keep Australians separated from the rest of the English population on a night out. It is like the mecca for 20-something Australians looking to get lashed on a Saturday evening. Cricket Australia released a statement confirming that Warner has been dropped from today's game against New Zealand and faces an imminent disciplinary hearing for behaviour unbecoming of a representative player and bringing the game into disrepute. Now, James, there's been plenty of outrage on the part of the English press, not just because David Warner hit an English player, apparently unprovoked, but that he hit Joe Root. If he'd hit Stuart Broad, then I'm sure the English press would have reacted slightly differently, and perhaps the English press would have even been in rapturous applause in favour of David Warner if he'd got into a tiff with Kevin Peterson. The thing is, James, Joe Root is a star in the making for England, and he's already reaching national treasure status. Punching Joe Root is an affront to all things British. It's like pissing in the Princess Diana Memorial Fountain, or like breaking a swan's neck. You just don't do it in Britain. So perhaps next time David Warner wants to get into a fight, he should pick on someone his own IQ. Of course, sadly for him, that rules out most people, bar perhaps Shane Watson and Dennis Ramden.
Now for another one of our radio cricket interviews, and this week I was lucky enough to chat to Ian Pont, who's one of the most innovative coaches in international cricket. After a colourful county career with Essex, Ian set up the Mavericks Cricket Institute in 1993 to pioneer the use of biomechanics in fast bowling. Ian's worked with many of the biggest names in the game, including Dale Steyn, Shoaib Akhtar and Shahid Afridi, as well as spending time as bowling coach to the Bangladesh national side and as head coach at Dhaka Gladiators, where he won the BPL in both 2012 and 2013. I spoke to Ian about his frustrations over how fast bowling is coached, corruption in cricket, and how he was inadvertently the inspiration behind India's 1983 World Cup win. Ian, so thanks very much for joining me on Radio Cricket. We're now well into the Champions Trophy. You're obviously renowned for your work with quick bowlers, so who've been the ones who've impressed or even disappointed you so far in the tournament?
Hi James, firstly thanks for having me on. I haven't watched a huge amount, to be honest, because obviously I've been busy working myself. There's always the usual suspects, the great fast bowlers from each of the countries, and you would expect in the English conditions those players to do well. Someone who has caught my eye, Kim Roach, was particularly aggressive and bowled well. Junaid Khan, I thought, bowled well, but the player for me so far that has stood out has been Wahab Riaz from Pakistan. And I watched a couple of videos of him from last year that were sent to me and did a little bit of video analysis. And I think he's worked really hard at his game. And I don't know whether Pakistan will end up qualifying or not out of this tournament, but I think most Pakistani supporters would be really excited by the fact that Wahab Riaz looks like he's going to turn into a pretty fine fast bowler. He's got swing. He looked aggressive at the crease. His action's pretty decent. There's a couple of things he could do better, but, no one's perfect. But he, to me, looked like someone who could make a really big name for himself on this stage. And, as I said, there's the usual suspects like Tim Southey and James Anderson and the guys that you'd expect to do well in pitches that nibble a little bit and conditions that swing. But Wahab Riaz, he's jumped out for me. He surprised me a little bit when I saw him. So I think he's definitely somebody that we should follow. And one of the South African bowlers, McLaren, I watched him bowl, Ryan McLaren, and I thought he's bowled pretty well. His stats may not be brilliant, but in terms of how and where he bowled and the type of deliveries he bowled, he looked to me like somebody who could become a decent cricketer. So those are the ones at this early stage, and I'm sure as we go through this whole competition, James, there's going to be a bunch of quicks that come to the fore, and we're going to say, wow, it's good to see. But it is genuinely nice to witness some new, fresh names potentially coming through.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think McLaren's been quite an impressive cricketer for a little while now, not only with the ball, with the bat as well. I remember in the ODI series against New Zealand back in the winter, he won a game with a 6 off the last ball. So I think I agree, someone to watch out for. But you mentioned Anderson there, and I just wanted to move on to the reverse swing we've seen at the tournament so far. And Anderson and also Bresnan, back from his recent surgery, seems to get quite a lot of reverse swing. Now, some people have found that a little bit surprising, particularly because we've been using 2 new balls, so you think they might not scuff up so quickly. From a technical point of view, Ian, have you been surprised to see so much reverse on offer with these 2 new balls?
No. The surprise for me has been other sides haven't really got to grips with it yet, and only the English contingent has. I spent time, as you know, coaching T20, and in T20 competitions, you get a cricket ball swinging in a T20 competition, reversing. So a ball can swing within 20 overs. Sometimes it's swinging reversing, I should say, as early as the 11th, 10th, 11th, 12th over. So if a new ball at both ends, if we're 25 overs in, halfway through a 50-over competition, each ball has had 12 overs off it. So that's around the time, if the conditions are good, as in dry, hard pitches, which they are, of course, in these competitions, and the ball occasionally getting battered into the crowd or hitting a concrete block or smashing into advertising hoardings, those balls often come back as a bit scuffed up. And one thing England has done particularly well is that we have employed the cross seam delivery, which helps to scuff a cricket ball up perfectly legitimately, of course. And you can actually accelerate the degeneration of the cricket ball to make one side rough or to get the ball roughed up a little bit earlier than normal. So these are good tactics. I think England has used them well. I haven't really seen the other teams getting to grips with that yet, certainly not as early in the game as England.
Just moving back to your experience on the subcontinent, Ian, you've coached in India with Haryana in the Ranji Trophy. We're perhaps seeing a slight renaissance in Indian fast bowling with the emergence of players like Umesh Yadav and Bhuvneshwar Kumar. But in general, as someone said on Twitter the other day, in the partition agreement, Pakistan got the bowlers and India got the batsmen. So, I mean, you've obviously got huge experience working in that region of the world. So why do you think it is that we still seem to have this relative lack of quicks coming out of the world's biggest cricket nation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a perennial one that often goes unanswered. My personal view, having coached in India, there are 2 reasons why, and the biggest one is lack of icons. If you're a young lad growing up today in India, you want to be Sachin Tendulkar or Rahul Dravid or Sehwag or Kohli or Dhoni, no disrespect, but you don't want to be Kumar. If you're, you don't want to be Madan Lal or Kapil Dev right back in the day. I mean, that's going back 25, 30 years. You want to be a big superstar. And India does not have big superstar fast bowlers at the moment. That will change over time, and if it does change over time, you'll see an uprising of young, quick, fast bowlers. In Bangladesh, for example, there are so many, 4 to 5 times, I would say, more slow left arm spin bowlers, than I've ever seen. And the thing about Bangladesh cricket is people like Saqib Al Hasan and Abdur Razzaq and these other guys, these left-arm spinners, are icon players, and young cricketers want to be like them, so they tend to copy and mimic. In India, they haven't had those great fast bowlers, but if you go across the border to Pakistan, I mean, you've got Wasim, Waqar, Shoaib, you've got great fast bowlers who are not only good for Pakistan, they were some of the best fast bowlers of all time. And it's not difficult to see why young lads are encouraged to become great fast bowlers in Pakistan. So that's, I think, the first reason why India has a little bit of a lack of quicks. It's a lack of an icon at the moment, or big icons. The second thing, though, James, is the coaching mentality in India is slow down, bowler line and length. And it's as if those two things are mutually exclusive, and they're not. You can speed up on bowler line and length, and that's called Brett Lee or Dale Steyn or Shoaib Akhtar. These guys aren't wild bowlers. They're quick bowlers who swing it, pitch it up, bowl straight, and are very aggressive. You can do both of those things. You can have control and you can have speed. The problem is you need to know how to coach it. And my experience in India is that those coaches are thin on the ground. They're few and far between. And so what tends to happen is they go back to the, oh, well, bowl quick, at least be accurate comment. And then everybody then slows down and bowls military medium and they just swing it around. So you have a population of 1 billion people. You'd think you'd have at least 10 or 15 genuine quicks come out of that. And, almost by numerical default, you'd have a bunch of quicks. But the fact that they don't and have genuinely less fast bowlers than other countries, that's a real worry for me, and it points towards how those players are coached. And having been there, I can back that up. I was absolutely horrified to see and hear some of the coaching that goes on in India in terms of teaching the youngsters to not focus on speed, just accuracy. But you can have both. You just simply need to know how to coach both.
Sure. Okay, well, if we could move on to your coaching method then now, and obviously biomechanics are fairly central to the doctrine that you developed. It seems to me that Australia were one of the first countries to embrace academia and science into their cricket. Stretching back 20 years, the National Board has worked with universities to look at things like strain injuries and how much rest quick bowlers need. Yet, ironically, it seems to be young Australian pacers such as Patrick Cummins who get injured more than most. So, Ian, for you, what are the essentials when bringing through a young quick so that their performance and pace is optimised, but their developing bodies are sufficiently protected?
Okay, well, there's a couple of things that are all mixed up in your initial question there, and they are, firstly, people are monitored a lot better than 40 years ago. People would play with a stress fracture of the back, and they just say, my back is sore today, but I'll just carry on. That's potentially a stress fracture. And what you get today is people being monitored to the nth degree, so they're only allowed to bowl a certain number of overs. We've seen this in junior cricket. Kids in English cricket can only bowl a certain number of overs by age. We have seen this brought in, so there's a lot of monitoring going on. So I would say that if we're seeing people break down or we're seeing people taken out of the game earlier, it's because they're being monitored for it. That's the first thing I would say. So there seems to be a lot higher incidence of injury. But to answer your question specifically about what things you need, one of the biggest problems I have, James, is that in cricket coaching, particularly fast bowling, we only ever focus on the outcome. Line and length, hit the top of off stump, shape it to slip, for example. However, when it comes to batting, you don't say to a batsman, try and hit the ball between those two fielders at extra cover. That's actually what you want the batsman to do. But we spend a lot of our time saying, work on your back lift, your stance, how you grip the bat, elbow high, lean into it, balanced, all technical information. And whenever a batsman is unsuccessful, they go back into the nets, they work on their technique. It's complete opposite for fast bowling. We have people running up to bowl with the weirdest bowling actions. Some of them are quite dangerous. Often people will break down due to their action, or they completely misaligned and they lose a lot of speed and control because of it. And the simple thing is, if you run up straight, go through the crease straight and follow 3 straight, the ball normally goes straight. If you start off from that premise, you're not going to go far wrong. And as we know, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So that gives us speed. So speed and accuracy are actually the same thing. They're different sides of the same coin. But there is a process to a bowling action that you can learn. It's like driving a car. We're not born car drivers. We learn how to drive a car, and it's a process. Fast bowling is a process. You can learn it step by step. Doesn't mean you can take an old lady off the street and teach her to bowl 90 miles an hour. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is you can take any person with a modicum of skill, give them more skill, show them how to do it better, faster, stronger, etc., and turn them into something better than they are. I can't believe, James, that in every other sport on this planet we can jump higher, run faster, throw further, hit stronger, yet we can't teach our bowlers to bowl quicker. That doesn't make any sense. And I think fast bowling coaching in particular is the most backward discipline in world sport. We have got this complete mental block about fast bowling. At every other sport that is around us, the closest cousin we have, by the way, being javelin, every other sport goes into the scientific and technical base work of how to project that object as fast as possible and as far as possible. We don't do that in fast bowling. And my coaching focuses in on that. Of course, it's about wrist position. Of course, it's about landing the ball in an okay area. I'm not saying that you can't be inaccurate. Of course, everybody has. And ironically, the slower you bowl, the more accurate you have to be, by the way. But, you know, there is a way of doing this. We haven't yet got it. The Australians went down the scientific route for a while, injury prevention. As you say, ironically, more and more people seem to be getting injured. But James, I really haven't seen any cricket boards get to grips with this at all. I think they don't understand it. They're probably looking for the answers, but the answers are pretty self-evident, to be honest. And I think if they look really closely at it, they'll be able to work it out.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the javelin there, Ian, because I noticed Fatima Whitbread once said you had the most natural throwing arm this side of the Iron Curtain. So if I could just focus on your abilities as a fielder, you were obviously renowned for having a great arm and indeed tried out for a few baseball franchises. Focusing on that sport, obviously we've recently had a lot of focus on Moneyball statistics used in that game, but also obviously we've got a crossover with fielding techniques from baseball being brought into cricket. I think you've worked with Julian Fontaine before in the past. So just in terms of both the use of Moneyball statistics and fielding techniques, do you think cricket has still got a lot to learn from baseball?
Well, it's a good question. Julian Fountain is a good friend of mine. We worked together in Bangladesh, and he's now the Pakistani fielding coach. Julian, for me, is the best fielding coach on the planet by a very, very long way. He's progressive. He uses good skill drills. He gets his message across well to players, and he's respected. And he's taken a lot of things that work in a sport where people are paid to throw and field for a living, which is baseball. And although they wear a glove, ostensibly it's the same movements. It's human movement. It's just biomechanics. And you can't just shoehorn it into cricket, but you can adapt and adopt it across, and he's done that. And I think that's a really relevant point. In terms of the Moneyball side of things, what we have seen, and it really comes mostly from franchise T20 cricket, is players coming in to do a specific job for their team. So in other words, instead of you picking your 11 best players, as in our 8 best batsmen and our 4 best bowlers and the best keeper, they're now picking utility players who can come in and bat in a certain time of the innings, bowl at a certain time of the innings, field in specific positions. And that means that sometimes lesser known players, I'll take an example for you, Kevin Cooper, the West Indian guy, who spent a lot of time playing T20 cricket. He's one of the hardest bowlers to bat against. He played in the IPL. His stats are incredible. And yet he doesn't play for the West Indies. He doesn't play county cricket here. I don't think he does. And he's not a big brand, household brand name. But in terms of how he performs, he is remarkable. And this comes back to the Moneyball idea that you pick a team to win a game of cricket. You don't just pick your best players full stop, regardless of the competition you're playing in. And that's where I think cricket has got very smart. And I think coaches earn their money because it's important that you blend you know, your local players, your overseas players. If it's a T20 franchise competition, if it's a 50 over competition, you need to know who's doing what at certain times. And the other thing is every player needs to know what their role is in that side, and that is a real coaching skill. But it's the way cricket's moved forward, and I think it's a lot smarter than it used to be.
If we could just come back to your earlier career, obviously you were very successful with Essex, but you mentioned Capel Dev earlier, and I noticed that you actually played for the minor counties in 1983 against an India side that contained the likes of Capel Dev, Gavaskar, Shastri, and who then shortly went on to win the World Cup a little while after. So you were actually the only side to beat them during their time in England on that tour. So what are your memories of that match?
It was a very odd game, and reminding me of that before I talk about the game is I met up with Sunil Gavaskar at the 2011 World Cup because I was Bangladesh bowling coach and he was commentating for one of the TV channels covering it. I shook hands with him and I hadn't seen him since 1983, and I thought he's never going to remember me. And I said, Sunil, Ian Pont. He looked at me. He said, "Oh yeah, Ian Pont." He said, "You have a brother Keith? You played for Essex?" And he said, "Minor counties." And I thought, oh my God, he remembers the game. And he said to me, it's absolutely true. He said to me, "Do you know something?" He said, "We were appalling." He said, "We lost to you guys. We kicked ourselves on the backside." He said, "And we tried to get our team back on track. You know, we tried to get the whole summer in England going." He said, "But that gave us a real shock, the fact we'd arrived and lost to the minor counties team, and by the way, well played to everybody." But he said, "We then, each game we played, we got better and better and better." He said, "And the best thing that could have happened was losing that match." And we went on and obviously won I think they beat the West Indies in the final, but they won the World Cup. Totally deserved, by the way. But he remembered the match. And for me, the one thing that stuck out about the game, and it's nothing particularly dramatic, it was quite a bleak day. It was a little bit windy and chilly. I don't think the Indian side were particularly excited by the weather conditions. The crowd was relatively small, and I opened the bowling, and Chris Srikanth hit me back over my head for 6 in the first over, and I tried to sledge him, and he sledged me back twice as hard and pointed the bat at me. You know, and I thought, oh my God, these guys are really up for a fight. And when we beat them, they didn't stay that long. They had a chat to us. They basically got on the team bus and they disappeared. And my memories of the day were, it was quite odd, that game, because I was at that stage playing for Buckinghamshire in the minor counties, and I'd been selected for the Benson Hedges trophy because the minor counties were in that setup at the time, and it was part of the games we were playing. And I probably, in hindsight, didn't realise how important that match was. But of course, history now tells us that we were the only side to beat the world champions that year, and we were effectively a bunch of amateurs. And it was a crazy game of cricket, you know. And but it was just the whole game was so low key, though. It wasn't, you know, there wasn't 20,000 people in. It wasn't at Lord's, you know. It was at a club ground. I think it was at Monk's Risborough.
Yeah, it was. I checked. It was Monk's Risborough.
Monk's Risborough, and I'd never played there before or since, and I've probably never even been back to the area. But you know, but it was a lovely club, and they were great, and it was just another game of cricket. But the historic importance of the match was quite high, and I think, as Sunil said, it really helped them to focus their cricket. As he said, we were playing appalling cricket at the time, so you were quite right. He said that you won the game.
Well, yeah, I think anyone has their work cut out trying to sledge Chris Srikanth through.
Yeah, he gave as good as he got.
And twice as quickly, I imagine.
Yes, he did,
but
yeah.
Anyway, well, look, Ian, just one final question. You've coached Dhaka Gladiators to 2 BPL championships, but obviously there's now a match-fixing case hanging over your captain there, Mohammed Ashraful. We wouldn't expect you to comment on the specifics of that case at all, but just a more general point, do you think that with all the sort of dubious agents and money men circling around young cricket players in the modern game, do you think that the sport's fighting a losing battle against corruption? Do you think money and human nature is regrettably just a very powerful mix?
I do think whatever sport you're in, there's always potentially an element of corruption, and it's extremely hard to stop, and it's extremely hard to get involved with. I think it does fall upon everyone in the game to be vigilant and to become our own police force, effectively. I mean, there's a couple of things at play here. The first one, of course, is us protecting our sport and doing the right thing. And the second thing is making sure that people do get paid well and do get paid on time. I do think that sometimes if players are paid late or payments aren't made, then that makes it easier for them to be corruptible.
All right, well, we appreciate you being so candid on that point, Ian, and yeah, I think it's a very valid point you make about payments, and hopefully they will get that sorted in the BPL as they move forward. So, all right, so Ian, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Radio Cricket. It's been a real pleasure to have someone of your knowledge and expertise with us, so we wish you all the very best in the future.
Thanks, James. Wish you well.
Well, thank you for that, James. That was a very hard-hitting interview in your typical cricketing paxman style. It was very interesting to hear from someone who's been through those experiences firsthand, and particularly interesting to hear Ian's thoughts on swing and the types of bowlers who are succeeding right now. So I hope our listeners enjoyed that, and please do feel free to tweet in or email us your suggestions as to who you'd like to hear next on Radio Cricket. We'd love to hear from you. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Radio Cricket. Make sure you do catch us on soundcloud.com/Radio Cricket, on iTunes, just search for Radio Cricket, or we're also on youtube.com/Alt Cricket. You can also catch us commentating live on the India versus Pakistan game this Saturday. All you need to do is go to appstore.com/OneSport or search for the app OneSport, and in the last 2 hours of the India versus Pakistan match, you'll be able to chat along to myself and James live with a few other fans, and we've had a very good time the few times that we've done it, so it would be great to have as many as you contributing as possible. And just so you know, I will be briefing James on the Urdu and Hindi swear words, so do feel free to use whatever language you feel like. James is happy to be abused. I don't think he gets enough on Twitter these days. So, and we'll also be covering the 2 semi-finals and the final as well of the Champions Trophy, so do make sure you join us for that. So until next week, from me, Nishant Joshi, it's goodbye.
And for me, James Marsh, I leave you with the thought that perhaps we've all rushed to judgment on David Warner on this issue, because it's now transpired that the altercation with Joe Root happened because he was trying to steal a wig from him. Now, ordinarily, if a man drunkenly assaults another in order to steal a wig with no ulterior motive, fine, we should condemn him. But if that man drunkenly steals a wig from another in order to try and give it to Mitchell Johnson, perhaps he should be praised. Goodbye.
I think it was a very poor performance. One of the worst things I have ever seen done on a cricket field. Good night.